Welcome to the pre-application information session for two of our grants that are competitive. These two are with Title II. We have the Teacher Quality Improvement Grant and the Mathematics and Science Partnership Grant. During today's information session, we're going to go through the different components of the grant and everything you need to know to be able to apply for the grant. We also want to make sure we get your questions answered. So as we are going along, please type your questions into the question box. And at the end of each section, we can pause to take a look at those questions and address them. And at the end of the webinar, we can stick around as well to continue to answer your questions. My name is Annette Thacker-Bartlett, and I am with OSSE. I am the grant manager for the SAHE Teacher Quality Improvement Grant. And Maya, would you like to introduce yourself? Okay, we'll get Maya back on here in a minute. I think she's having trouble connecting. Okay, so we're going to go through an overview of the grants and talk about the timeline, and then dive into its provisions, the scope, the priority areas that your applications should focus on, talk about partnerships, and then we, of course, are going to tell you exactly how our readers will be reviewing and scoring your applications. And then Richard will take you into an EGMS tutorial. If you're pretty experienced at applying for grants with OSSE through EGMS, you can log off early and don't need to stick around for that tutorial. But if you'd like some tips, Richard will be extremely helpful. Now, I've just sent an email to everyone with the email you used to register that has a copy of the PowerPoint, and it has 3 other documents that we're going to use today. I will show those documents on my screen when we are talking about them, but if you wanted to have your own copy to take notes on or whatever, you should have received an email, and it's also available for download from the toolbar of your GoToWebinar toolbar. And today we are talking about 2 grants at the same time. So 2 separate grants, the Math and Science Partnership Grant, or MSP, and the SAHE Teacher Quality Improvement Grant, which I will probably refer to as SAHE. Now, both of these have very similar requirements, and they are following the exact same application timeline. So almost everything that we talk about today applies to both grants. If there are differences, then we will specify that there are differences. And just so you know, this is the last grant cycle. So this is the last round of money that we are giving out for these grants because, as you know, Obama signed into effect the Every Student Succeeds Act, which will replace the No Child Left Behind Act. That will go into effect this next school year. So with that new act comes a lot of changes with the different titles and grants and what's available. So stay tuned to learn more about those opportunities. But this will be the final cycle for SAHE and MSP as we know it. So the timeline. The grant officially went out for notice that funding was available on February 10th. Today is the pre-application information session. The official application will open next Tuesday in EGMS, and then you will have 30 days to complete your application, and you must submit your application no later than 5 p.m. on March 30th. Not March 31st, but March 30th. Any applications submitted after 5 p.m. on this date will not be considered for the award. And then once those applications come in, first OSSE internally reviews the applications to make sure they meet basic requirements. And the basic requirements are what we are discussing with you today. If you do not meet all of the basic requirements, then we can reject your application and you do not get a second chance to submit because the deadline will be over by then. So please make sure you have all the required elements. The EGMS grant system online is built to allow you to fill in all of the requirements. It covers all your bases there, but there are other documents that EGMS will ask you to upload, things like that. We'll walk you through that. But just make sure before you hit the submit button that everything's there so that it makes it past the first round of review. and then we send it to our independent grant readers to review and score it. We'll talk about that. And then we are really hoping we can wrap up all of the review and scoring and make announcements on awards in the month of April. So that is our goal and our timeline as of now. So first we're going to talk about each grant, just sort of its purpose and background to help you get familiar with it as you are thinking about what type of program you might want to propose. I'll speak to the SAHE TQI portion, and then I'll turn it over to Maya to speak about the MSP background. So the SAHE grant, this is just sort of tells you where it comes from. It comes from the No Child Left Behind reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So these are federal funds coming from the Federal Department of Education to every state, who then turns around and gives them to subgrantees to fulfill their objectives and purposes. Now, the SAHE TQI grant is a little bit unique because you have to partner with an institution of higher education, so a university or other type of organization, and a high-need LEA needs to be involved, which we will define for you. The whole point of this grant is having good professional development, which of course helps teachers and principals, who then improve student achievement. So one of the major parts of this grant, you could choose to focus your program on increasing the number of highly qualified teachers in the classroom. Now, this grant is meant to foster innovation, so of course we welcome different types of innovative ideas or trying new things, but they do need to be rooted in research and evidence that they can lead to good outcomes. And the focus areas, when we talk about those later, those will help you get a better idea of some of the things that you can do. So we got to get those teachers qualified and help them feel more confident in the classroom, teaching core academic subject area. It's also to support principals and assistant principals, because we all know they play a very big role with student learning. And so it's really focused on core academics and improving teaching through professional development. To apply for the SAHE grant, you have to have, at a minimum, 3 partners involved. One of the partners has to be a private or state institution of higher education, as I like to call an IHE. It has to be the part of the IHE that prepares teachers and principals. So maybe it's the Department of Teacher Prep or the College of Education, whatever that department or college is within the university. You have to have a point of contact there and build that partnership with that department. You also have to have a relationship with an IHE School of Arts and Sciences. And that's because you have to bring in the core academic, connect to the core academic part with this professional development. And then one of the required partners has to be a high-need LEA, which we will define in a minute. Optional partners, you can have other LEAs be involved, charter schools, public or private elementary or secondary schools. You could have a second IHE involved. You could involve a nonprofit, teacher or principal organization, or a business. So you can get creative with who else you involved, but those first 3 in the left column are the required partners. Now, which one is the lead applicant? That depends on how you go about it. In the past, we've had SAHE subgrantees where the subgrantee was the IHE. They took the lead and submitted the application and formed the partnerships with the other 2 partners. And we've also had it where the LEA is the lead applicant, where they turn in the application and build those partnerships with the IHEs. We've also had it where a nonprofit has been the lead applicant, and the nonprofit has gathered together the required partners from the IHEs and the high-need LEA. Now, Maya, do you want to talk for a minute about the MSP? Maya, can you hear me?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So the Math Science Partnership Grant is intended to create, it is focused on STEM education and STEM content areas. Again, similar to SAHE, we have you partnering with a high-need school district. But the difference between MSP and SAHE is that instead of a school of education, you're partnering instead with STEM faculty and institutions of higher education. And so that's a distinction. Okay. We can move to the next slide. That would be great. So the introduction to MSP, it's a formula grant that's submitted to all states. What's nice about this is that means that there's a historical track record of this program in other states. So if you're interested in applying for Math Science Partnership, you can look at projects that other states have done, as well as the District of Columbia in the past few years. But the projects really focus on content and pedagogical knowledge of teachers and how increasing or improving that knowledge can then influence academic performance of students in math and science. And so, as we spoke about a little bit earlier, this really consists of partnership between a high-need LEA, high-need school district, an institution of higher education's math, science, technology, or engineering faculty department. That doesn't mean that you cannot have other partners as part of the program, which we'll refer to next. But you can see that the focus is really on improving or increasing teacher effectiveness in this area, strengthening teacher content knowledge, improving classroom instruction, and then seeing how that then impacts student achievement scores. Okay. And so this is just a little bit more. There is a plethora of information online about this program. I would encourage you to, once you get this slide deck, you'll be able to click on the hyperlink and learn a little bit more about the program qualifications and the different programs that fall under this criteria. But you can see 4 of the primary objectives of MSP on this slide. So we can move forward. So the required partners, again, are high-need LEA. That doesn't mean that you cannot partner with some of our, I wouldn't say low-need LEAs, but additional LEAs are also eligible for participation, along with the charter schools, or those can include charter schools, public and private schools, or consortia of schools, but as long as the lead partner in the application is the high-need LEA. Additionally, you can partner with other departments, a teacher training department at an IHE, as well as the one of the STEM departments. But the caveat here is that you absolutely need to have a STEM department as one of the lead required partners. Sorry about the background noise. And then you can also include a business or a nonprofit or for-profit organization as part of the additional partner. They just cannot be the lead partner in this process. And so that means that you can work with some of our organizations outside the community, or perhaps like an organization that might be in another state, but perhaps is brought in to do the evaluation piece of this grant. So those are all applicable as part of this, as long as your 2 lead applicants meet the criteria. Okay.
Thanks, Maya. And as we said, for both of our grants, it is a requirement that at least one of the partners is a high-need LEA. And the definition for high-need LEA for this grant at this time is you need to meet criteria 1 and 2. So 1, you have 2 choices. You can serve not fewer than 10,000 children below the poverty line, which is pretty unusual here in DC. Almost every LEA doesn't meet that one, so it's usually Part B, where not less than 20% of the children served by the agency are from families with incomes below the poverty line, and for which more than 10% of the teachers are not effective according to the LEA's teacher evaluation system. And we know different LEAs have different systems at this time, so that's just all dependent on how they a rate and view their teachers. So, and we do know there's quite a few LEAs in DC that meet requirement number 1B as well, with a large chunk of their students from families with low income. So that's what it means to be a high need LEA. If you're not a high need LEA, you could still apply for this grant. You just need to bring in one of your partners would need to be a different LEA that does meet this requirement. So the money, let's talk about the money. So each year, again, this is the last year for this grant, but traditionally every year we get around $280,000 for the SAHE grant and around $750,000 for the MSP grant. This year, and then from that we have to take out a few dollars for state level costs, administrative costs and whatnot, and then the rest passes through to the subgrantees who are awarded the money. So this year for SAHE, we have exactly $262,155 to give out to our grant awardees. And for MSP, we have $721,779 exactly to award. And from that, we typically make multiple awards. For SAHE, we usually make about 2 separate awards, subgrantees, so that money would be split up. And for MSP, we do about 2 or 3 awards. It just depends on the type of applicants and the type of programming that type of program they're looking at doing. And sometimes sometimes when we award a grant, we will award less money or more money than what the grant asks for. It just depends on, again, who all applies and if your
amount of funding available.
The funding available, exactly. Okay. Now there is a requirement. There is a funding requirement to make sure that the money is spread around and not disproportionately concentrated in one of the partnership's organizations. So this is one of the federal funding requirements, and you can't have more than 50% of the money that's awarded to you benefiting, or may use, meaning benefiting a certain partnership. So, but you as the primary partner, obviously OSSE is only going to give the money to one organization. So if you are the primary partner that sends in the application and you are an LEA, or for example, if you're an LEA or an IHE, you still then have to turn around and share some of that money with your partners for the different things you've budgeted for. Now this is kind of a weird sounding law. I know it's a little confusing, but in the RFA, that is one of the handouts. In fact, let me just show you the RFA so that you feel comfortable with the...
There are some examples detailed in the RFA for you to review. And so just to give you an idea of what we'll be looking for in your budget template. So as Annette brings this up, we've included in both the RFA for TQI as well as the RFA for MSP some examples of possible scenarios to help you unpack this a little bit more. But certainly, when you're mapping out your budget and your application, this is what we'll have the reviewers look for. It's kind of like that equitable access to funding opportunities as described in this slide.
Thank you, Maya. And I'm just going to show you where to find that in this document. We're not going to review it in depth. I just want to point your attention to it. So I sent by email to all of you the RFAs, the requests for applications for both SAHE and MSP grants. And a lot of what's in them is very similar. If you look at the table of contents, there's section 7, the partnership funding formula. And if I go down to section 7, you will see the same rule that I have on my slide, and then you'll see an example of a correct funding formula, an example of an incorrect funding formula. So please use that as a reference when you're thinking about how to divide up the money. Now, when it comes to OSSE paying you, we do not give the money up front. This award works on a reimbursement basis. So you do have to kind of plan ahead for that. So you have to first you tell us with your application, your budget, how you're going to spend the money. then you spend the money, and after you spend some of the money, then you submit a request to OSSE through EGMS to get reimbursed for the money you have spent. So those are for costs that have been paid. So for example, if you are paying some money to the department of a university to provide the PD, when you pay them, you take the check, the invoice, the check, the documentation that shows you paid them, and submit it to OSSE as evidence that you have spent the money. And then we look at that and say, okay, it looks like they spent the money that they said they were going to spend for this particular item in their budget, and then we pay you back as a reimbursement. So currently, our current subgrantees from last year's cycle, just for your reference, right now we have with MSP, we have Center for Inspired Teaching and Multicultural Career Internship Program. Maya, do you want to explain just real quick the types of things that those two subgrantees are doing with the grant they were awarded?
Sure. So Center for Inspired Teaching chose to focus on developing professional development opportunities from multiple schools or multiple LEAs focused on the next generation science standards. And so their model is to develop a cohort of teachers over the course of the year and improve their effectiveness in delivering NGSS or next generation science standard aligned units and really exploring the three-dimensional nature of those standards through their professional development. And so that's really exciting, as those are fairly new standards for the District of Columbia. Our other grantee, Multicultural Career Internship Program, which is housed in the Columbia Heights Education Campus, is focused on supporting English learners and math and success in math. And so they're working with teachers in the University of Maryland to kind of think about ways that they might engage learners more effectively in the classroom around math instruction. And so that's the work they're doing.
Thanks, Maya. And for SAHE, the Center City Public Charter School is one of our current subgrantees, and they are doing a really neat program that's focused on teacher residency and taking those brand new teachers and really giving them wraparound support and PD during their first year of teaching. They're actually using some of the money to pay some of the salaries of those teachers, and also to partner with an IHE that's giving them some intensive professional development, and as well to have some other staff overseeing it and some master teachers involved as well in helping these. It's sort of like a new teacher induction / teacher residency program. And Democracy Prep, they are using their grant to really focus on core academic content in math and the Common Core State Standards for mathematics, because they decided that was a critical area that they really wanted to boost their teacher effectiveness on. And so their whole school with the math teachers, not just the math teachers, the whole school with anyone that's involved in math instruction is getting rigorous PD as they partner with a local university. And so those are just two examples of them using the SAHE for its intended purposes. Okay, I do not see any questions coming in yet, so I'm going to move on to the next section, but I'm definitely watching the question box to see if anything pops up along the way. So we're going to talk about general provisions of the grant. Some of these will go quickly and some will pause to talk a little bit more in depth on. As we discussed before, that both these grants are partnership grants. There's always going to be a lead applicant. If your organization is the one that turns in the application to EGMS, you are the lead applicant, and we only communicate with you for everything about the money and the reimbursements and the progress reports, everything like that. And then you turn around and you communicate with the other partners. Now, with that said, of course, we want to make sure that your partners are truly on board. And so part of the application is going to require certain types of documentation from your principal partners that, yes, in fact, they are in this together with you. So there's a few forms you need to fill out that we're going to show you. One of the things you will need to get is a letter of support, or we also call it a memorandum of understanding, an MOU.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll talk about that. Oh, here we are on this next slide. Okay, so part of the required documentation has to be, we're telling you this now because we don't want you to, get into your application in EGMS and then all of a sudden you read in EGMS, oh, you're required to upload this form. And we don't want that to be the first time you're hearing about it. We want you to be prepared as you're starting your application by starting to gather these other documents so that they will be ready to upload in EGMS when you do input your application. So there is a partnership identification form. And this is found
required by both grants. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we have the partnership identification form, which this is hyperlinked to where you find the form on our website. Then you will have to have a MOU or letter of agreement with your principal partners. You have to have a affidavit to show that everything's cool with your taxes with DC. You will need to provide resumes of salaried positions that are part of your grant program. And then both grants make reference to equitable opportunity for private schools, students and teachers to be involved. But we recently learned this requirement is only if you are a DCPS applicant. So otherwise you can not worry about that one. Of course, you are welcome to involve a private school. That's definitely an optional partner for you. And then for the MSP,
and then,
Maya, do you want to explain the organizational chart?
Sure. MSP requires you to upload an organizational chart for the grant personnel, and it just shows the interrelationship of the different partners working on the grant. So that org chart should kind of detail positions and roles and responsibilities, or should speak to that. It'll be something to upload in the work plan portion of the application.
Great, thank you. And here's just a little bit more in depth about the partnership documentation. This is some language that I've pulled out of EGMS and put on this slide to show you the exact requirements. Here's a little snapshot of when you're in EGMS, there's lots of different tabs. And so there is a sub-tab called Partner Identification. And on there, you're going to list all your partners and the main contact person with each of those partner organizations. And you're going to be asked to write a brief description, brief meaning no more than 2,000 characters, not 2,000 words, about that partnership. But then, of course, we are going to go look at your MOU or letter of agreement that you've uploaded that goes much more in depth about how you're going to work together with this partner organization. And so we provide...
And I just want to, as a
go ahead.
Caveat, sorry. In the past, we've had folks turn in one or the other, and that's been a source of frustration because then those folks are eliminated. So just to clarify, you need both. You need to identify your partners as well as have a memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding, from that partner signed. And more specifically, signed by a decision maker at the organization. So for example, if you are a school of education, it's not enough to have a memorandum of agreement signed by the professor you're going to be working with. You need to have the dean of that school of education sign off on this grant as well, because that is like a decision-making authority at the university level. And so we've had some disqualification in the past under memorandum of understanding because that level of individuals at the decision-making level at the university was not looped in or was not part of the signature portion of the memorandum of understanding. And so just to make sure, and if you have questions about that, you should feel free to email Annette or I, but just making sure that the right person is signing that memorandum of understanding is really important as well.
Thank you, Maya. And yes, so we provide you the partnership identification form. It's a very simple form, but we do not give you a template for the MOU. You develop your own MOU with with that partner organization, however you want that to look. Just make sure it includes the information that we are looking for. So we did have one question come in from a participant asking for SAHE about the required partners, because SAHE is a little bit unique in that you have to have, I'm just going back to the, here we are. So SAHE, you have to have 2 separate partnerships with an IHE. One of the partnerships has to be with that part of the IHE that is like the School of Education or teacher preparation. Then you have to have a separate partnership with an IHE with the School of Arts or Sciences. It could be the same IHE, but then it would be 2 separate departments that you treat them as separate partnerships for the purposes of them both sort of signing on to the grant and being involved. Now, the School of Arts and Sciences, that's because whatever program you're doing for SAHE, it's going to involve core academic content. And so, for example, maybe there's the College of Math and Sciences or the English Language Arts College, or somehow you need to loop in, like maybe there's a professor that assists in developing the PD or consults with the PD from another department that has that core academic content knowledge and then works together with the School of Education at that IHE. And so then you have both input from both places. So let me know if you still have further questions about that. Okay, so we've talked about partnerships. Now the award period. This grant is a 1-year grant, but it also has a 1-year carryover period in addition to that. Now what's tricky about this grant is that the money, the fiscal year started this last fall, October 1st. Technically is the start of when the money is available to be used. And so the grant year, you're not actually getting a full grant year to spend this money. The grant year for this grant ends this September. However, there is a 1-year carryover period where you can continue to spend. You won't get new money in the second year, but you can continue to spend any money that you were awarded in this fiscal year with this grant cycle. So as you're thinking about your plan, if you're going to be awarded the money, hopefully in April, then you have from April till this September to spend the money as part of this year. And if you don't spend it all, you can spend it the next year from October all the way until next year, September 30th, 2018 is the last day that you can spend money and submit for reimbursement as part of this grant cycle. So when you're planning, that encompasses just a couple months of this school year, all of this summer, all next school year, and next summer. Those are sort of the time periods you're working with when you're thinking about the type of professional development program, the type of grant program that you want to do. Okay, so we have audits. Of course, we just have to warn you about this, that you could be audited at any time, both either by DC or by the federal government. So just keep all your records for at least 5 years. And in addition to auditing, we have to monitor. So Maya and I, as the grant managers, will be doing monitoring. But monitoring can look, our monitoring activities take many forms. So there is the traditional annual monitoring visit, but we also have you fill out bi-monthly progress reports. We provide you a template. It's very short. And as part of the grant, also when you're done with the grant, you have to turn into us a final report as well as a full evaluation report. And the full evaluation report is a significant part of whatever project you're doing, so you might even want to think about including that in your budget, a portion to have an evaluator develop a comprehensive report for you. But we can talk about that a little bit later. And as part of this grant program, we ask all subgrantees to do a short workshop at our annual May LEA Institute, which is a showcase of best practices in education. Now we do have a couple more questions coming in. So I did talk a few minutes ago about with the SAHE grant, you have to have 2 separate IHE partnerships. And those 2 separate partnerships can both be separate departments within the same IHE, or they can be with separate IHEs. Like you could have the School of Education from one university, and then you can have a separate IHE where you have their math department or science department or whatever partner. So you can get them both from the same IHE or separate IHEs, but you do need those 2 separate partnerships established. Now we have a question about, do either of the grants have an interest or focus on teacher training work provided around race and equity? So these grants, we're looking for things that are innovative, that are open-ended. So we definitely encourage you to submit whatever type of grant program you're thinking about doing. You'll see later when we talk about the scoring rubric, we do ask a question in the scoring rubric to make sure that that the opportunities are available to everyone. And so there are no, I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm not saying this very well, there's no, having your grant focus around race and equity can definitely be incorporated as part of your grant proposal, as long as you're meeting the other requirements as well. And we'll talk about grant focus in just a minute. Maya?
Sure. I was going to say that a lot of those outcomes are going to be, when we talk about the different components of the application, we're going to ask you to make a relationship, or the grants ask you to make a relationship between the work you're doing and student achievement outcomes. And I think that's a place where we're looking to close achievement gaps, certainly, and look at effectiveness of educators, especially specific to high need schools. And so those are areas where I think we've seen in the past people really weave in some work around race and equity and trying to really close those gaps.
Thank you, Maya. Okay, so, and we do have to just remind you that there's a lot of legalese, all kinds of statements and provisions about conflict of interest and tax liability, non-discrimination. So there will be a part in the application that looks like this snapshot. There'll be a few places where you need to show that you are going to go along with these terms and conditions. You need to give us assurances that you will. So you check the box. You'd be surprised how many people try to turn an application without checking this box. So don't forget to check the boxes. And you should be familiar with the contents of the certifications, assurances, non-discrimination, conflicts of interest. So just be familiar with those parts. You can read about all of those in the RFA documents that I sent to you as well. Okay, program scope. So it's different for the MSP and the SAHE grant. So Maya and I will talk about those separately, but one thing they do have in common is the budget requirements. One of the handouts I gave to you looks like this table that I have a little snapshot of. So when you turn in your application, you have to submit a very specific budget of how you're going to spend your money. And every item in your budget has to fall somewhere on this grid. There's 6 different budget categories that go along the top, and there's 8 different program categories that go down along the side. Let me just pull that up for our reference here. So you can see along the top we have salaries and benefits, contracted professional services, equipment, supplies and materials, fixed property costs, and other. And then along the side, we have instruction, support services, administrative costs, operations, student transportation, other, and training, and travel. So you will have to classify each of your items, line items in your budget. You'll have to say which program category it's in and which budget category. And so there's drop-down menus when you're in EGMS that will force you to pick the right category, force you to pick a category. And so please use this chart as a reference to make sure you're putting budget items in the correct categories for their purposes. And of course, if you need to make, let's say you submit an application and you do get an award, and then later you need to adjust some things in your budget, that's fine. You are allowed to make adjustments to your budget. And the way you do that is you would have to submit an amendment request through EGMS, and then we'd look at it and make sure that your changes to your budget still fit the scope and objectives of your grant. And then we can approve it if it meets the requirements. So you can amend your budget later, just know that. But then when you go to request reimbursements, we already talked about this a little bit, that you need to make sure your documentation shows that you spent the money on something within the scope of the budget that you submitted. And then you don't want to rely on EGMS as your only place for budgeting, because you put your budget in your application there, but EGMS isn't something that you go to on a daily basis to balance your checkbook. So make sure that your fiscal person is keeping really good records outside of EGMS for all of your expenditures. Okay, allowable use of funds. I'm not going to read this list for the sake of time, but these are some things that you can spend money on. And these are some things that you cannot spend money on. So make sure you're familiar with those as you're thinking about setting up your budget. If you spent money on some of these things and you tried to get reimbursed for it, we would deny your reimbursement request. And of course, if you have any questions, ask your grant point of contact if something is allowable or not. Okay, I'm going to have Maya talk about some of the applications requirements for MSP. So Maya, do you want me to start here, or do you want me to start with the flow chart, or
let's start with the first slide you had up.
Okay.
Yep. So MSP is a little bit different than SAHE TQI in that there are requirements embedded in the grant application that are federal requirements. And so we try to list I'm
going to pull it up.
Okay. Well, this is right here. We have a statement of need for MSP. So they want to know, in the application, you're going to be asked to describe how is this a need that you're addressing for the LEA or for the teachers that you're working with, or the community that you're working with. And we're asking you to support that statement of need with data. So whether it's park data or whether it's attendance data, school-specific data, you're going to be asked to support the application or your application with that statement of need, and really identify how it's really connecting with something that the community, it has relevance for the community. The second area we're gonna, that's a federal requirement, we might just want to go back to the PowerPoint. This is outlined in the RFA for sure. The second area is that we've been asked to kind of really be explicit about the evaluation design for this grant. So how are you, what are the project outcomes? How are you planning on assessing the project outcomes? And some of that will come into play in the design of your logic model. And so that's a federal requirement. And then finally, there are very specific requirements or eligibility components for a math science partnership grant. And so in the RFA, it says, hey, you can go to this website and look at them in a little bit more depth, but it also lists out some of the things that we were talking about. You need to partner with an institution of higher education's engineering, science, or math department on this grant. You need to work with a high need LEA. This should be a professional development proposal. And so there are a lot of embedded things that should be associated with your project design, but they're federal requirements. And so they spend a lot of time looking at what can we deliver to people in terms of guidance around what we are looking for in these grants, and there's a whole list. And so it's not more than 10 requirements under project design and implementation, but it's certainly something we want you to read, and that's outlined in the RFA, and then that's showing you right now a little bit around that. And so
Section 3.
When you click on your application, it's Section 3 in the RFA. When you're in EGMS, the way that'll look is when you click on that specific area in the application, it'll say federal requirement, and it'll actually have the legislation just to make it extra exciting for everyone applying for the grant. And so that's worth mentioning. We wanted to make sure you knew that those weren't components that there's a reason those components specifically are being asked for. The next portion, if we could pull up the slides again. Okay. Is just a little bit around this federal or the MSP grant and funding cycle. So this grant is a little bit different than SAHE TQI, and we're required to deliver kind of a summary of how the funding is being spent and Congress, and that report goes to Congress every year. And so people who receive the Math Science Partnership Grant are asked to register in in a federal program database and go ahead and put your project abstract, your evaluation measures, and all of those things, because Congress wants to see how this money is being spent. Now, this grant is ending as of this year, so I don't know to what degree that might change that, but it's just so that whoever's applying for this grant knows that your abstract as well as the program narrative will be loaded up online and be publicly available to whoever looks at the federal MSP page, and so that's important to note. So the next slide. So some more information about the evaluation requirements. Annette spoke a little bit earlier about how you're going to be required to submit a full evaluation report to OSSE, and then also that evaluation report will be uploaded onto that program, that federal program site that I just spoke of. And so it's just important to note that there's almost like OSSE will see that program evaluation, but that's also something that will be available to the public and the community, the academic community for input. The purpose of these grants is really to grow the field around teacher education, teacher quality improvement, especially as it relates to STEM education. And so we want to share your research on your project broadly with the community, both locally and nationally. And that's just one of the ways we do it. Okay. All right. So we'll go into the application details for MSP later. Annette's going to talk about the specifics for her application for TQI at this point.
Thanks.
Or do you want to just fast forward to MSP and then I'll finish up MSP?
Oh, for the requirements?
Yeah, for the application.
In EGMS?
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead. You can continue.
So SAHE, the requirements here, and again, this is just summarizing what you can read more in depth in the RFA document. The SAHE grant is all about professional development. It's all about focusing on the teachers and the principals, they themselves need to make sure they understand math if they're going to be teaching math, for example. And then help them have the instructional skills to help the students master the content. And so your application, no matter what type of grant program you're trying to set up, the application will ask you to describe how you're going to ensure that your teachers, paraprofessionals, and principals, if relevant, are going to develop that subject matter knowledge. And it's also going to ask you to describe how you're going to make sure the principals have the instructional leadership skills to work effectively with teachers. Excuse me. You're also going to be asked to describe in your application how you are going to support the LEA in having this professional development that is sustained and high quality, that's very focused on academic learning standards. So our DC state learning standards would be Common Core state standards for ELA literacy, or for mathematics, we have the Next Generation Science standards. You could train somebody or a group of people to then go turn around and then they become the PD providers within their own school. That's one model you could do. Or you could create partnerships across multiple LEAs, schools, or IHEs. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about using the money for this grant that still fulfilled its objectives and purposes. But we are going to ask you to describe all of these things. We're going to ask you who's going to benefit from this, how many students, how many teachers, who's going to be touched by this grant, and will this program you're putting in place, can it be a model for increasing student learning through other professional development activities? Is it going to meet the needs of teachers? What kind of lasting impact do you foresee this program will have? How are your objectives of your program in line with the purposes of this federal grant? How are your partners going to collaborate together? What kind of resources are you going to use? And again, as we discussed, if you are a DCPS applicant, then you need to make sure that private schools were at least approached and consulted with to see if they wanted to be part of the opportunity. And then for both SAHE and MSP, you're going to have to describe these things in your application. The need, the target population, the need for the program, the impact, the measurable objectives, and the services to be provided. You're going to have to give us a detailed work plan and quality assurance mechanisms. So all of these will be, there's a place in EGMS to write a lot of narrative about all of these things. So just be prepared for that. So our grant areas have focus areas where at the state level we have determined that some areas of need, and your grant is actually required to connect to at least one priority area. You can connect to more, but at least one. So for SAHE, there are 4 priority areas. The first one is that your program can focus on PD aimed at supporting high quality induction systems for new teachers in core subject areas. Or your program could focus on PD programs that support training teachers through IHE-LEA teacher residency partnerships. Or you could focus on professional development that supports instruction to special populations. Special populations could be English learners or students with disabilities, or both. Or you could focus your grant program on PD to implement the next generation science standards and make sure that your teachers are fully prepared and sound in their knowledge and able to help children master the next generation science standards. So your grant application needs to address at least one priority area. And you can see a lot of these areas are very different. So typically grant applications will just focus on one of these. There's no rule against focusing on more than one, but you have to connect to at least one. Maya, do you want to explain your priority areas for MSP?
Sure, and these are outlined in more detail on the RFA, but the first area of focus is really aimed at providing support around supporting a cohort or improving the effectiveness of a cohort of STEM teachers at high need LEAs. So the focus is on STEM content areas, it's on improving effectiveness of educators at high need LEAs. And so that's really exciting. That specific priority area can be interpreted in a number of different ways. And so when you read in more detail in the RFA, that can look like a cohort, it can look like several summer institutes, it can look like a number of different things. And the focus really there is around supporting implementation or high quality implementation of both the next gen science standards, engineering across the curriculum, computer science across the curriculum. It could involve a whole variety of different topics. Common Core math, of course, you've heard us mention several times, and so that's an area there. The second area of focus is around in-service collaboration with industry leaders, and that focus is really on providing educators with work-based learning opportunities or research opportunities in a lab setting or in a work-based learning setting. And so there's more detail about that. And the focus there is to work specifically with educators so they get that real-world connection to what they might be teaching in the classroom. And the third area of focus is around supporting our students with special needs or our English learners. So it's strategies to really increase teacher effectiveness around supporting these students specific to STEM subjects. And so we've had a project in the past that are focused on engaging English learners or making math more accessible to English learners in the classroom. And so there are a variety of different topic areas that might fit in there. And then finally, not mentioned here, but you'll see in the application, we give a priority point. Each of these are worth 5 priority points in the application. So you can choose one or you can choose more than one, as Annette mentioned. But there's a final priority point specific to quasi-experimental or experimental design. And that's just how you structure the professional development opportunity. And there are more details about what that means on the website.
Great, thank you, Maya. We do have a question that came in for SAHE about what it means to be a core content area. And so core subject areas, the next generation science standards do count as one of the core subject areas, but also math and also English language arts, literacy, reading. So when you think about the core, it would be the areas that we focus on for for accountability with statewide assessments, and with those learning standards, with math or ELA literacy with the Common Core, or next generation science standards.
And social studies.
And social studies. Okay, so now we're going to talk about review and scoring of the applications. And then we will turn the time over to Richard for his EGMS tutorial. So both of our grants, the MSP and the SAHE, and many other grants at OSSE, they all get reviewed by an independent panel of 3 people. Those 3 people are picked because they are neutral, totally independent from OSSE. They are qualified professionals, and with their experience in relevant fields. Again, you can read a little bit more in depth about the type of reviewers we choose in the RFA document. And they score based on a rubric, and the rubric is customized for each grant, because every grant has a different sort of focus, but it all adds up to 100 points, each rubric. So, and we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but we just want to emphasize again that your application may not even make it to the reader review and scoring phase if it is screened out initially because it doesn't meet the federal requirements. So please make sure that you fulfill all of the basic requirements of this grant, the ones we've talked about today. Just read more about them in the RFA and in the EGMS online application. There will also be language there talking about them. So just make sure you check all the boxes, dot your I's, cross your T's, because we really hate to see an application with a really good idea for a grant program. We really hate to see it get cast aside and not even make it to the review round by the readers because they've left out a requirement. So just remember that. Okay, so the rubrics. So Maya, I'll let you talk about your math scoring rubric, and then I will talk about SAHE.
Okay. So the MSP scoring criteria is out of 100 points. It has 7 sections, plus an 8th optional section for the private school consult. And so I just want to take you through just a few of the different points. When you review or when you begin your MSP application, you're going to be asked to, or I think I have slides for this on the next slide. So for the first criteria for an abstract, and all of these are required. And so you want to make sure you complete all of them, even if this is a 2 points out of 100. You're going to want to include an abstract. So that's just a summary description letting us know a little bit more about your project. Normally an abstract is not more than 250 words, but we gave you 2,000 words. So you can interpret that as you would like. But when you click on that portion of the application, it gives you a little more detail about what's required in that summary description. So the next section is around priority points. And we talked a little bit about this. So we listed 3 areas in the RFA, and then an additional priority point available for quasi-experimental and experimental methodology associated with your project. So not only will you need to click on the different areas where you want to be assessed by the reviewers around priority points, but you're going to be asked to provide a summary description. So you're going to say, these are the 2 areas I would like priority points, or I think our application applies to, and then here is why. And so you can get a maximum of 20 points in this section. Each of the priority areas are worth 5. So that's a great way to pick up some points, but we cannot award the points if you do not provide a description of how you're actually addressing those points in the summary in that section. Criteria 3 is the huge lift. It's the brunt. It's basically your entire project description. It's 42 points and includes a project narrative, which is basically an extension of your abstract, a needs assessment, which is a federal requirement, and so that's really, again, relating the project to the needs of the community and providing evidence as such. Describing your program goals, your partnerships, and that's where you'll have room to upload your memorandums of understanding and your different partnership agreement forms, an accountability plan, an evaluation plan, and a sustainability plan. So how are you continuing this work beyond the project? And we're really interested in that. And so this is 42 points out of the entire, this is weighted at 42 points out of the 100. So criteria 4 is the work plan, and that section really is asking you to be a little more explicit about the measurable objectives associated with your projects, the different activities associated with your projects, and allows you to upload supporting documents associated with both the project implementation as well as the work plan. Criteria 5 is a detailed budget. Again, thinking through some of those tips we gave you earlier around do's and don'ts around your budget, and how you can be explicit around the partnership funding formula and all of those things. And so the rubric for this section really speaks to, are the costs reasonable and allowable? Are you paying yourself $1 million and no one else is getting anything out of the grant? And so it sounds, I'm laughing as I say it, but you know, sometimes we see costs that are like, I'm going to buy a $3 million trampoline, and perhaps that's not really aligned with the grant's objectives. And so just kind of thinking about that as you enter in your budget. Criteria 5, criteria 6 for MSP is focused on your management personnel plan, again, with the org chart, a description of roles and responsibility, resumes from your relevant staff, and reasonable salaries associated with the project. Criteria 7 is a logic model, and that has a specific form to enter in the information in EGMS, but you can also upload more materials for clarification in that section as well. So what are your inputs? What are your outcomes? What are your outputs? We're asking you to kind of take us through that. And so when the reviewers are actually looking at the relationship between the activities in your grant and the outcomes that you anticipate, they're able to follow that flow pretty easily. And then criteria 8, as we mentioned before, is not on here, but it's optional. It's the private school consultation form. And so that is something that's associated specifically with DCPS. And so that's a brief overview of the MSP scoring criteria. You can see where different areas are weighted more heavily than others, but all areas are required.
Thanks, Maya. And I know in EGMS, when you start filling out the application, the scoring criteria is there on a tab for you to reference as you're filling out your application, and it goes in much more depth about each area. It has more narrative that talks about each area, and so again, this is just the overview of how it'll be scored. So SAHE TQI, it uses a different rubric. It's got a few similarities, but it uses a different rubric. And I don't know why the criterion are called A, B, C, D, E instead of 1, 2, 3. Who knows? But the for SAHE, there is 8 different criterion categories that are weighted differently depending on them. And so the criterion A, for example, is 25 points, but then those 25 points are broken up into all these subcategories or sub-questions of the rubric. So you can get some of them, you can get the 5 points, some of them you won't. The scoring is all or nothing. So for example, 1A, if they felt like you met this part of the rubric, they would give you 5 points. But if not, it's sort of a yes or no. And yes, you get the 5 points. No, you get 0 points. So keep that in mind. Criterion B, I'm not going to read all the criterion. I just want you to know where you can find it and to refer to it as you are filling out your application. So criterion A is the program narrative. So this is worth actually a lot of points because it does describe overall what you're doing, and A, B, C, D, E, those, make sure you're hitting on all of those in your narrative. And then B is the work plan. And again, in EGMS, you're going to have to be putting your work plan in a specific way, and the reader will be looking at everything the reader sees is what you put into EGMS. They don't look at anything else except what you typed into EGMS or what you uploaded to EGMS. And so from that, they need to see if you're meeting these requirements, if you're getting the points for this. Now, one of you asked a question earlier about students, minority students or equity and race, things like that. So you can see here criterion B, C, part C. In your application, we will give points if we can see a clear description of how members of groups that have been traditionally underrepresented will be impacted by the program. And again, that could be special populations or other traditionally underrepresented groups. The staffing plan talks about the personnel, who's going to do what. Maybe you have a professor from the IHE, maybe you have a principal at the school, maybe you have certain teachers or other things. Just be very clear in your staffing plan about what everybody's going to be doing, and you need to have anyone that's going to get paid as a salary from this grant or part of their salary, you need to include their resume as part of the application. So you will upload that into EGMS. And then, of course, part 2, again, speaks to some of those more underrepresented groups where you can get points that describes how you are encouraging the participation of these types of groups. Funding accountability is a shorter section. It's just 5 points. So you either get the 5 points or you don't. It's sort of a yes or no if the reader feels that you've met this criteria. Criterion E is the evaluation plan. And as Maya talked about, this is a very important part of our grant program. We want to see a plan from the beginning about how you're going to evaluate the project by the time you finish to see what kind of outcomes you have. So make sure that plan is clear in your initial application. And then we will be looking at your budget to make sure it is realistic and in line with the purposes of this grant. Sustainability will get you some points. And the last criterion is similar to Maya's. It's the logic model. A logic model is kind of an abstract concept. I didn't know what that was for a long time, so I had to look it up. But the good news is we have this link here that will take you to a website that will provide some. Let me just show you the website, the OSSE website. So this is the OSSE website for SAHE, and that talks about the required documentation. There's a similar one for MSP. So here you can see a link for a resource to help when you make your logic model. There's a 39-page document that can be a good resource for you.
You can also Google logic model, and you'll be presented with a couple of different designs, but that's the one we really suggest going through in spite of the 39 pages of joy.
It's so fun. And we spoke earlier about the partnership identification form. This is actually the website where you get that partnership identification form. So you'd find that form right here. And back to the slides. Okay, so that is how it will be scored for SAHE. Now, to read more in depth, you would just take the RFA document that I've given you. And the RFA document has a section that's all about review and scoring of applications that we just discussed. So you can find all of the criterion, broken down exactly how it will be awarded points in this section of the RFA document. So you can look at that as you are going along. Okay, we are wrapping up. The last section that we're going.
But before, before we move on, we encourage you to log on to EGMS early and review once Richard goes through, but log on to EGMS early and go through the application so that if you have any questions about any of that, you can connect with the grant managers as soon as possible. And so once the grant is released next Tuesday on EGMS, we encourage you to sign on right away and just do a quick scan just to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what's being asked for.
Great, thank you, Maya. That is a great suggestion because you can always save. You're going to log into EGMS a million times. It's not one of those things where you log in and fill out the application all in one sitting. So just play around in there and click around and look at all the different tabs, and you'll see that a lot of the language in the RFA is the same language that will show up in EGMS. The last section of the RFA that we're not going to talk about is all the terms and conditions and assurances. This is a lot of legalese and just a lot of things, just different provisions that are more legal stuff. Just make sure that you are aware of them. These aren't specific to the MSP and SAHE grant. These are the same terms and conditions and assurances that we have for a number of different grants. So they're more generic legal things, but we just have to tell you, just be aware of them. So the fine print, I guess you could call it. So make sure you read the fine print. Now, Maya and I are done with this portion of the application, of the webinar today, excuse me. And you have our contact information in case you have questions as you're going along. And now I'm going to turn it over to Richard and let him introduce himself and give you some tips on how to get started with EGMS and have a positive experience there. And I have a little snapshot at the bottom of the screen from the EGMS homepage, which has a lot of helpful resources. So you don't have to text Richard at midnight if you're having trouble with EGMS, because there's actually a lot of resources online. So he's going to talk about that, so I will turn the time over to him. Richard, do you want me to make you the presenter?
All right. Did you transfer over me?
Yep. You have to...
okay, right on. I was having a conversation, sorry. Okay, let's show my screen. And which screen do you guys see? Do you guys see EGMS screen?
EGMS.
Or do you see a spreadsheet?
I see your EGMS screen.
EGMS? Okay, great. Let me see how I can hide the control panel. There we go. That's great. Okay, well, hello, everyone. Let me just, I should have set this up a little bit sooner, but what we're going to do today is we're going to basically walk you through the process of EGMS. This is basically, does this work? Yeah, that works. So my name is Richard Rowley, Colin Nakamura Rowley, for those of you who didn't hear beforehand. I work in the Office of Grants Management and Compliance in conjunction with both Maya and Annette. My job basically is to kind of like oversee kind of like some of the funds that go out in the agency and to ensure that they kind of like get out and go to the places so we can continue getting new funds and that you guys can do your programmatic kind of things. So what we're going to discuss here today is the Enterprise Grant Management System. This is a system that basically has been online for us for the past 3 years. Prior to this, we did run into a situation where it is that my boss had she was working and one day she came into the office and saw someone who had a shoebox full of receipts that they were kind of like submitting for reimbursement, and she's like, oh well, we're way behind the times, we need to fix this. A lot of times what happens is our CBOs or community-based organizations would spend funds, wait until they got reimbursed, wait between 30 and 45 days or maybe even 60 days to get reimbursed, then they would spend again. So that was a little bit too long of an turnover time for us. And so what we've done is we've set up the Enterprise Grant Management System. Today, what we're going to cover is a couple of things. Oops, what happened there? We're going to cover resources. That's way, in case you drop off the line or I lose you, you'll at least know where to go to find the same stuff that we're going to discuss today. We also have new user information. This is how to become a new user in the system. We're going to discuss GMS Access Select. This is the page where it is that you'll be able to find all the grants and be able to manage them. Then we'll discuss central data, which is an application in the system, and then we'll discuss the applications, which I believe Maya and Annette have already covered a little bit. I have reimbursement requests and closeout reports on here. However, we won't be touching on those today. In terms of resources, one of the best places to go is our EGMS landing page, and that's going to include videos and guides. You're going to click on this little icon right here that's basically labeled training and has the little calendar right there. That's going to get you to where the videos and the guides are at. There's also our OSSE help desk. Now this is that has both a phone number and an email address. In certain cases, it's sometimes easier to get a phone to call in because they will create your ticket right at that time. However, some other times it's easier and better for an email to go in, and that's in case that you have like some kind of visual kind of like error message that you can include in a screenshot, and then that can help better inform the help desk of what your issue is. Now, it's best to contact them just because they may have already addressed this issue with somebody else before, and they know exactly what happens, and they know a solution for that. I'm going to briefly jump out of this PowerPoint presentation real quickly to kind of like just go over this. Basically, when you type in grants.osse.dc.gov, it will take you to our landing page, and it basically has like a little explanation for you. This is the login button right over here. We'll be using that in just a moment. And here's that training section right here. So what we've done is we've kind of like set this up in pre-award phase, award phase, and post-award phase. Right now with the MSP and SAHE grants, we're in the pre-award phase, so you can kind of find out more information of what might you kind of the problems that you may have run into while you're trying to complete your application right now. So come to this area. My total recommendation is that you check this out. We do have a user manual. This is a great resource for you. It's basically also going to cover how to complete an application. I do have some information for central data and for applications as well. Let's go back to my PowerPoint real quick because I think the next point is, oh yes, the grants at a glance right here. So this is just basically a very brief and quick understanding of grants. We have over here on the y-axis, we have the LEA and OSSE, and then on the x-axis, we have the kind of like time frame. We have the pre-award, award, and post-award. Now, in this section right here, and basically this big box right here is what it is that you as the recipients or the applicants will do, and then this area is what it is that OSSE will do. We're in the pre-award phase, so here you can see that you'll register as a vendor in EGMS if you haven't already, and you'll identify grants that you're interested in. You'll create the central data and also submit your applications, and then OSSE will receive and review those applications. So we're just going to cover this part today. Let's see, the next section that we have for this is the life cycle timeline. I won't go over this too much. It's basically just got animations in it. We'll skip over here to this section right here. So this is the new user section. So you'll recall that I showed you the login button. For the first time users, you'll use the new user link. So when you click the login button, it'll bring up a little pop-up that looks like this. And what you'll do is you'll click on the new user button. What that will do is that will take you to this next section called new user. What you will need is you will need your federal entity identification number, your FEIN or EIN. Basically, what I like to think of and explain this is that this is kind of like the social security number for your organization, kind of like identify it as an entity with the federal government. You'll enter that in this area right here. What EGMS will do is it'll search and it'll try and find your organization. Like for example, mine might be Test DC organization. In this case, it did not find an organization, so it will bring up this new vendor request section right here. With this new vendor request section, you will have to upload your IRS W-9 form and then your master collection form. It'll ask for your organization name. What I do ask is that you do input the information exactly like you would like it to see. One person actually had a typo in their name, and that's how it appeared in the system for quite a while, and it took us a while to get that updated. So please do type that in correctly. It also asks for the name of an individual at your organization. Now this really should be the fiscal director or the fiscal operator at your organization because it's asked for the first name, last name, email address, and also the role. Let's discuss this role here for a second. Yeah, so in terms of like the roles, if you were to log in and let's say You know, you clicked on the new user, you did the new user request, you put in the new user, and, you know, I put in Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. That's my organization. That's great. It found it. I could put request, and then what I will do is I'll enter kind of like that same information it was asking for beforehand, which is my first name, my last name, my email address, and then the role. Let's discuss roles here. So for the new user, there's 3 types of roles. There's view only, and I made this like little icon right here to kind of better demonstrate this. So view only can basically see everything. This is great for your heads of organization that they are interested in seeing how much money they have, but you don't want them to be able to input anything or accidentally submit an application that's not ready to go. Then the next role is the data entry. So this one can do everything it is a view only can, but has like a little bit more authority in terms of the fact that these individuals may submit applications, agree to assurances, and submit reimbursement requests. So that's your data entry, and then you'll notice here like then even more authorized individuals, the authorized representative. This individual can excuse me, did I say, let's see, data entry can create applications and reimbursement requests. They cannot submit them or they cannot agree to assurances. Authorized representatives can do those 2 things. They can submit the applications and reimbursement requests and also agree to the assurances, which the data entry and view only cannot. We do recommend that you have 2 authorized representatives at your organization, even though EGMS is a web-based system and you can pretty much access it almost anywhere. I access the most recent place I accessed it was where was I at? Ireland, actually. So you can kind of access it almost anywhere. You can get an internet connection. But one of the things about it is that we do recommend that you have 2 people because sometimes people just are not contactable, you know, and you want to, if the deadline is 5 o'clock on a Thursday, you want to make sure that someone can definitely submit that and agree to those assurances. As I mentioned before, you can see the EGMS landing page, clicking on that training button to find out more information about becoming a new user in EGMS. Once you are a new user, you will be able to log in and you'll be directed to the GMS Access Select. Now, GMS is short for Grant Management System. And within this area, you'll be able to, let's say that I'm logged in here as an individual at Booker T. Washington. You see that there's 2 sections here. We have the created section and the available section. Now, there's these little shaded triangles right here. They're called chevrons. When you click on them, what happens is that they expand down and you can see the different types of grants that are available. So for example, once the SAHE and the MSP grants become available, you'll log in, you'll click on this little chevron, and it'll show the MSP and the SAHE grants underneath there. Once you click on create, then what happens is that the system will take you to the application, and then you can kind of like use these navigation buttons that are in the top right-hand corner, like click to return to menu list, and it'll bring you back to this page, and then you can click on created, because once it's underneath available and you create the application, it's then underneath the created section. Another thing that you can find on GMS Access Select is the overview page, which is going to include the funding summary. So I've created like a little screenshot for you right here so you can see this. This is Booker T. Washington again, and this is in the fiscal year 2017. Here we can see that they have Title 1, 2, and 3 in the Consolidated School-Wide Pool Program. Here it's going to basically label out the funds that are available, the last approved budget, and what's been paid to date. So this is very good for your those individuals that have the view-only access, because they can see exactly how much money is available, how much has been paid out, and how much is remaining. Then there's another thing that you can see on this page is we have different buttons. Here you can see in central data we have the original application. It has a status of not submitted. These buttons right here will open it up so you can see it and you can edit it. If this were original application and it were final approved, you could also click on the amend button, which would then create amendment number 1, which basically clones or copies everything that was in the original application and makes it available to you to open up and edit. There's review summary. This is where that you can check to see, once you do submit your application, you can click on review summary and see the exact individual to whom it was assigned. This is great because this is a function that's also available with a reimbursement request, which what sometimes might have happened in the past is that you completed the application and then you submitted it to an email and then you never really heard back. Sometimes individuals or sometimes applicants did not hear back from or receive a confirmation that the application was received. So in this case, EGMS kind of has a function for that where you can click on Review Summary and see exactly who it is that has to whom the application has been forwarded. Then there's Delete Application, and you'll see from the text I have here, Delete Application is legit. Usually ask the audience, what do you think this does? Usually everyone gets it right, which is basically if I click on this button, then yes, it really will delete the application. And let me just check here real quickly to see if I have any questions. Nope, I don't believe so. Can't see them all too well, but we'll just go ahead and continue going forward here. All right, so so that's your kind of like your GMS Access Select page. One of the things I did want to address also is that we do have central data. Central data is kind of one of the mini applications that we have inside here. And we use this kind of basically, I like to refer to this as kind of like our Rolodex. And not everyone knows what a Rolodex is, but basically old school office desks used to have kind of like this like little like flipping kind of like round that you could spin the thing and it would have like little 3x5 cards inside there. And basically individuals would write down like the contacts. So I would write down, oh, Xavier School for the Gifted Youth and youngsters. You know, the primary person on there is, our primary contact is Jean Gray. And then I would be able to have a telephone number and back then probably a fax number and an email address. So what we basically use is we use central data as the same similar thing here. You can see that these are tabs, basically the application tabs for it. There's an overview, which is informational, central contacts, which would include Jean Gray's information. Then we also have a section for DUNS numbers, assurances, allocation, funding summary, and then a submit button, and then of course some other like additional buttons that just kind of basically keep some good institutional information, like in terms of maintaining the history, and then allows you to print. One of the things is I do want to note is the DUNS number. The DUNS stands for Data Universal Number System, and it's used to maintain accurate and timely information on businesses. This is basically, this is kind of like pretty similar to like your social security number for the organization as well. This basically just lets us know that you are an organization that we can do business with within the district. Underneath the DUNS number, there's also the SAM expiration date. There's assurances that you'll have to agree to. Now, there's two sections within eGMS that you'll do assurances. One is basically here underneath central data, and that's because in order for OSSE to disperse any funds, we do have to have all of our organizations agree to some very basic assurances. This is basically like the no lobby kind of laws, so you won't use these monies to lobby. I believe we also have an anti-gun assurance on there too, so no guns on the campus. And so you'll do those here, and then there's the other place where you'll do these are within the application. I believe Maya and Annette probably addressed some of that. Then there's also the consistency check. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's underneath the submit button. What I do want to continue talking about is the System for Award Management, the SAM expiration date. Basically, the SAM expiration date is, for us, the federal government basically looks at your organization, and the way I kind of like to explain this one is that me as an individual, me as Richard, every single year I have to submit my taxes in April, or hopefully beforehand, but by at least April. Get my taxes in, and that basically, you know, what can happen is that then I can like apply to different things. If I don't get my taxes in and I apply to like federal funds, like a Pell Grant or something along those lines, the federal government will be like, wait a second, you haven't paid your taxes, why would we give you additional money? It's the same thing for your organization. So if your organization is, you know, like in good standing with the federal government, then they will issue you, or you can apply for a SAM expiration date, which means that the federal government and therefore OSSE can then disperse funds to you, and that you're good up to a certain date. Now, I put into red right here, users will typically receive notification 30 days prior to expiration, and will definitely want to update the SAM expiration date prior to expiration to make sure there's no break in the disbursement of funds. Now, this usually comes up during the year because once that expiration date passes, we as OSSE can no longer disperse those funds. So what ends up happening is that we need you to update that information, and it takes a little while. So please make sure that whomever it is that receives your SAM expiration date receives that notification, and that you keep that in, keep it valid so that we can continue to disperse funds without any problems with that. Because once the expiration date does expire, there's sometimes it does extend the time that we are able to get that to you. One of the things I included in here is a screenshot of kind of like basically where it is that you would enter your DUNS number and your SAM expiration date. We do ask that you upload a PDF copy of the entity overview record. We do check that because, again, that's a federal requirement for us. That's kind of straightforward. I think it's straightforward. Let me check and see if there's any questions. I don't believe so. I must be doing awesome. Let's see, the consistency check. This is one of the other things that I want to note. So once you're completing the application, it could be central data or it could be MSP or SAHE. Once you're ready and you've completed all of the tabs that are within the application, you'll ultimately end up at the submit tab. And if you get the submit tab, you will have to run a consistency check. There's a button that's along the third, like there's 3 buttons that are there, and you can click on consistency check. What that basically does is that'll run through the entire system. It'll ensure that for any of the required fields that you do have something at least input or uploaded to that field. Now, one of the things I want to note is that it does not check to make sure that that is a good answer. Just make sure that there's something that's in that area. So please double check your uploads and make sure that you check your answers that are inputted in the system. Once you do click on consistency check, as I mentioned, it runs through those. If there's any errors, it will show up in the top left-hand corner in red text, the different types of things that need to be corrected before you're able to submit it. If it does run a consistency check and there's been no issue, no problems with it, what will happen is that it will automatically lock the application. It basically has run through, and it's basically someone at your organization has clicked on consistency check and it's run through and it's passed. So the system will automatically lock that because at this point it's a submittable application, and you may not want to accidentally click on something. In order to you could sleep on it that night, and then the next morning come into the office and be like, you know what, I do want to change that one thing underneath, this application portion of things, and you can click on the unlock application button. That will unlock the application, and then that will allow edits. So what that does mean, though, is that you will have to go back to the submit button, and you will have to run another consistency check. Once the consistency check is run and everything is golden, then you can also get the submit to OSSE button. Just let me cover my notes here. Errors appear in red and must be resolved. Upon successful consistency check, it will lock it, and yeah, unlock is available on the submit tab. Great. That covers that portion of things. In terms of the application, I kind of did go over this a little bit, but I won't go over too much because I believe that Annette and Maya did talk about both the narrative, the budget process, and the program assurances that were there. The one thing I do want to note again is that we do have the review summary. You can click on that button. Once it's submitted to OSSE, you can click on this button. A pop-up blocker, it will bring up a pop-up, and so your pop-up blocker must be off. What I do is right here is like you will need to make a second attempt, because the first time you try to do it, it'll bring up the pop-up. It most likely will be blocked by a software on your computer. You'll have to click yes, allow this one, and then make a second attempt, and then it will pop up for you. As we're back to the resources page here, this is basically kind of like, so I can finish up here. We've come full circle, and I wanted to leave you guys with this. I want to make sure, yeah, that's right. I want to leave you with this information on the screen at least, so you can see that and you can note that down and make a reference to this as you're applying to this grant. And I believe that is everything that I have. I'm looking for any questions, and I don't see any.
Richard, I do have one question that's come up in the past. Is it advisable to save your responses? Because some of them are pretty long narrative. Is it advisable to type it up in a Word document first and then copy and paste into eGMS, or are there issues with trying to copy and paste from Word documents into eGMS?
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Annette. So we do recommend that you probably do draft up your answers to your questions. We actually recommend, instead of doing it in Microsoft Word, that you do it in Notepad, because Notepad will, in the past we have had situations where if you have done it in Word and you copy and paste it over, it also copies and pastes the code for each one of those letters. And if you use special characters, then it copies over a code that doesn't comply with the system. and will create a lot of error messages. So if you do it in Notepad, then it should copy over without any problems. I believe, though, that we have tried to fix that portion in Microsoft Word, though, so that might still work. If it doesn't, though, that's the reason why that should probably be done in Notepad.
Well, somebody told me also you can type it in Microsoft Word and then you do save as, and you save your Word document as rich text format. That's what I've heard. I haven't tried it myself, but so that might do the same thing that Notepad would do with taking out the codes with the letters.
The code for the special characters, yeah.
Well,
other questions?
See any questions coming in, so I think we'll wrap up. You have all of our contact information, and we look forward to seeing your application submitted over the next month. Thank you, and have a great day.